The teachers union in New York City got together with the NAACP and sued to essentially kick charter schools out of buildings. I'm Bob Bowdon. I started choicemedia.tv, which is an education reform homepage, we hope to be, covering news and opinion columns about education reform. We really thought that this was kind of a vertical subject matter, the reform in particular aspect of education, that needed a website that covered it every day. As the education reform movement explodes, charter schools only grow in number every year. Homeschooling is a double-digit growth rates also. Tenure reforms and last in, first out and seniority pay provisions are changing. Merit pay, that kind of thing. Teacher evaluations are changing all around the country. We've covered stories from the New Orleans charter school turnaround to the Atlanta cheating scandal to voucher law being overturned by a court in Colorado. One story that we covered came from a release from the Seattle Public Schools, and it was called The Achievement Gap That Isn't Racial. What the Seattle Public Schools found is that the black kids that came from Africa, that were born in Africa and are now in Seattle Public Schools, of which there are almost 1,000, not a tiny number, are academically outperforming the black kids who were born in America in those schools. And so for those who talk about the racial achievement gap in America, it's an important subject, and it's been debated for quite a long time. This kind of data was shocking to see. In that scenario, it's not about race, it's about culture, and what it essentially showed is that, culture matters. Another story we covered was this suit where the teachers union in New York City got together with the NAACP and sued to essentially kick charter schools out of buildings where they were co-located with regular district schools. This caused rallies on both sides in New York City. Many said the NAACP is suing the very schools that are helping black kids in New York the most. Almost 100% minority kids in these charter schools. Why is the NAACP, that's supposed to be serving the interests of black kids, opposing these schools who are almost doing nothing but helping black kids? And eventually, the suit was won by the charter schools, and within a week a new suit was launched saying that, all right, instead of kicking them out, we want to make them pay $100 million in rent for co-locating. These would have been empty floors in district schools in New York City. But the teachers union wants to basically make sure that they pay $100 million, which would cripple many of these struggling charter schools. After the suit was announced, it then hit the media that cash had been transferred from the teachers union to the NAACP and to the groups who made the second suit about rent being paid by the charter schools. In other words, while I can't prove a quid pro quo, these groups like the NAACP that were suing charter schools were being paid by the unions at the same time. It's infuriating when you look into the faces of these kids who are being helped by the schools, and then you imagine that someone could, I'll say theoretically, be paid money to hurt their education and take it and say, yes, for the money, I will engage in a lawsuit, my group will engage in a lawsuit that will hurt these kids because you know what, we care more about the money than we do about their futures. The establishment in education usually will tell you that we who run the regular district public schools are chagrined by this money draining to these few charter schools. It's costing our education system. We desperately need this money to improve, and it's draining to these little satellite charters out there. Imagine if the model is completely reversed, where the bulk of the schools are charters. It's hard to imagine how that draining argument would be made when, quote unquote, the real schools are the schools of choice. New media, the internet, social media is the way to reach more and more people. It's also, let's face it, a low-cost way to reach people. More and more people are expecting their news on their iPhones and Android devices and iPads. I've worked in more traditional cable news outlets and other kinds of traditional journalism. In some ways, this kind of work we're doing now is more responsive to people, both in an immediate sense of timeliness when things happen and break and the Twitter world blows up about a certain issue, as well as a kind of opinion on the ground, a kind of a grassroots style and opinion that otherwise would be ignored by the gatekeepers. We actually feel like we're helping real children, potentially. So it's not just a job, it's a cause.